Broadcasting live. It's America's longest running talk show on computers. It's Computer America, bringing you the biggest names in technology with guest interviews, new products, and your emails. Listen live at computeramerica.com on any device around the world. Email the show at live@computeramerica.com or find us on social media. Be sure to check out our website for contests, giveaways, show notes, live video stream, podcasts, and more. You're listening to Computer America.
Hello and welcome into the Computer America Show. We are the nation's longest running and nationally syndicated radio talk show on computers and technology. Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Ben Crossman, and everyone out there, thank you so much for tuning in. Obviously, today on the program, we have a full show of computer and technology news and tons of stories. Don't worry about it. Plenty to talk about, including just a little sneak peek, including AMD's latest unveiled Threadripper CPUs. $1,400. We'll talk about what that actually gets you with those. We have more, including the fact that China is actually banning kids from playing games past 10 p.m. That's right. Another day that we can say, thank goodness we don't live in China. And let's see, one more little sneak peek. Let's go ahead and talk about the Project Silica from Microsoft. And if you thought you had long-term storage, yeah, this is going to blow your mind. So, before we get started, computeramerica.com, that's where you'll find everything, including show notes from yesterday's show, today's show, tomorrow's show, every show in between, which would just be those 3 shows, and actually today's show. But hey, everything that we talk about here, including articles, news, products, videos, everything like that will be found in the show notes at computeramerica.com. Give it a look. We have some recent articles, some reviews that are up, and we'll, of course, be posting more later on this week. Now, with that being said, let's go ahead and talk about a couple of, let's go ahead and say, again, thank you for tuning into Computer America. Why don't we just go ahead and get started with computer and technology news, which is, of course, brought to you by Computer America. So everyone, let's go ahead and get today's show started. And I think for today, our first story, we're going to lead with a big one. And one of the biggest ones, one of our favorite ones, AMD. We've talked about them as, as processors for a long time. And hey, let's start there, because just this morning, they have announced a slew of new processors that are going to rival some of Intel's best processors. And if you're new, let's go ahead and just say the obvious. AMD never plans on being the best of the best. They want to be the best price, for price conscious people. And I'm not saying that they're the cheapest, but for the performance that you get, for the price that you pay, few things that Intel has compares. Obviously, Intel is going to have their top of the line $2,000 processor that's going to beat anything that AMD has in their lineup. But as we're going to see, some of the processors that AMD just announced are going to save you hundreds of dollars in comparable, hundreds of dollars for a comparable product, but it's still not going to be the best product on the market. So let's go ahead and get started. AMD 16-core Ryzen 3950X. 3950X is its fastest desktop processor ever. And for $749, that's right, we have a price, it'll still be $400 less than Intel's 12-core i9 9920X. So there's the arena that they're competing in. They're competing against the 12-core, was kind of what they're I'm sure according to clock speed, they're competing against Intel's 12-core, but they're still coming in hundreds of dollars less, and you get a bit more. This thing is amazing. So after getting some wins against Intel in the desktop enthusiast processor race, AMD is trying to run up the score with the latest model, the Ryzen 9 3950X, saying that it has 16 cores, 32 threads, which is amazing. For everyone out there who does not follow this stuff extremely closely, most processors, and up until recent years, most processors, and I'm talking like the high end, if you really care about your processor, is going to have about 8 cores, 16 threads if you come from the world of Intel. And of course, we have heard tale of 18 core, 36 thread, and things like that. But 16 core is near some of the best consumer or prosumer that you will be able to buy. They said it has 16 cores, 32 threads, a 3.5 gigahertz clock speed that can be boosted up to 4.7. But here's the thing: on 2 cores, not all 32 threads, not all 16 cores, but only on 2 cores. But the reasoning for that, and I'm not saying that's really a negative, that's how most processors work, is that if you're running an application, and let's say you're running a video game that's very intensive, but most video games can only run on 2 to 4 cores. 2 cores, 4 threads at most. That's how they're programmed, because when they're designing the game, developers they can't expect every computer that they're going to put a game out for, every person is going to have at least, let's say, 8 cores, or they're going to have at least 4 cores dedicated exclusively for the game. So 2 cores, 4 threads is generally what most high-intensity applications use. But then with that much headroom, you're going to be able to do a lot more, like browse the web or do, switch between tabs very easily, run multiple applications for productivity reasons. 16 cores is going to do a lot for you, and if you're running that one program that takes up most of the space, then hey, that's where those 2 4.7 boosted cores come in. And again, costs about $750, and when you compare that to about $1,200 for Intel's 12-core processor, at the same time, AMD claims it outperforms the Intel processor in gaming, and even more so for content creation, where those extra cores can be best exploited. And really, that's where those extra cores really shine. And it's just not an area that a lot of people get into, but it's for rendering. It's for rendering videos. It's for putting. Let's say you need to encode a video. Let's say you need to put out. You need to render an art scene or something like that. Just in terms of creation, and Derek Shani would be able to explain this better. But in terms of creation, the more cores and threads that you have, the faster your work will get done. And if you do this for a living, if you do this for a job, then that extra time saved could mean everything to you. It would pay for itself in no time. But if you're not in that field, then hey, some of those threads may be a waste for now, because as multiple cores and higher core counts become more ubiquitous, other programs and applications will take advantage of multiple cores. We're just not at that point yet. Think of it as a little bit like future-proofing yourself. So here we go. According to the company, being AMD, it'll do some Adobe Premiere tasks up to 26% quicker than the i9 and 42% faster than an 8-core i9 9900K. Better still, the Ryzen 9 3950X delivers 2.34 times more performance per watt than its Intel counterpart. And of course, if you wonder why they keep talking about the power that's consumed, it's because in a lot of ways, power consumed, that's going to be big for workstations and other things that you really have to compete for power. But in other ways, they're also talking about heat and heat dissipation and the fact that it's so much more efficient that it doesn't need as much electricity, therefore it won't produce as much heat, which means that, hey, you could probably push that thing a little bit further if you really want to push it up against the top, or it will just be more durable. It will last for longer. It's just not producing as much heat, and that's a good thing. Ryzen 9 3950X is built using AMD's 7nm Zen 2 architecture, which the 7nm, that's really where Intel is slipping and AMD is really stepping up to the plate, is having the ability to produce on a 7nm Zen 2 architecture. And it's designed for liquid cooling. AMD, and as AMD said, you'll need to take some of the AMD's performance results with a grain of salt, obviously, because overclock numbers as AMD's 3000 series CPUs haven't been hitting claimed clock frequencies in all cores. Despite that, Ryzen 9 3000X has been crushing it in most benchmarks, especially for content creation. And this warning that I usually give is that if you're looking for a processor and you're wondering which one is going to outperform one another, if you're looking for the real true blue, which is the best processor, find a trusted outlet, be that anything from Engadget to Computer America, of course, to Digital Trends has a lot of great journalists that do a lot of great work with this. But when you're looking at benchmarks, the companies, they do thousands of benchmarks that you can be sure are not ever published because they're looking for the best benchmarks and the best conditions that they can possibly get. Like, they're going to play to the Ryzen 9 3950X. They're going to play to its strengths to a T. And a T is not exactly real world conditions. So, they can claim it does one thing, but always look for a trusted outlet to do their own benchmarks and then do that. So like AMD's other Ryzen 9 3000 series chips, the 3950X will support PCIe 4.0, and they will allow for faster graphics and storage performance for PCIe 4.0 SSDs and other products, saying that Intel does not support PCIe 4.0 yet and has downplayed its importance for gamers. Faster storage is always a good thing. And PCIe 4.0, it's coming. I think currently the bottleneck is not going to be the difference between PCIe 4.0 and 3.0, but it's something that people definitely want. It just means it's another step that when 4.0 becomes the lay of the land, it's one less thing that you have to consider. Should I upgrade for this performance increase? It's nice to have. It's not the most important thing in the world, but you definitely want it. If you're spending $1,000 on these things, you definitely want it. And they said that if $750 is $700 too much, AMD has another option. They also announced the Athlon 3000G. It's a dual-core processor that runs at 3.5, which is very respectable. But AMD said it's the only unlocked option in its segment, meaning that you can push it around to 3.9 gigahertz. Because a lot of those lower-end processors, they're very fixed. They're very locked. They are... Oh, how do I put this nicely? Cheaper processors are made on the cheap, and they don't want you overclocking these things whatsoever or boosting their performance, because that adds a certain level of stress to these cheaply made chips, which can of course make them crash and burn. So AMD said this is the only option in the market, and that it will boost its performance ahead of Intel's $73 Pentium G5400, and the Athlon 3000G will arrive here in a couple weeks for $49, which is amazing. It's really cool that they announced something for their high end and their low end at the same time, and it's very, very cool to see. AMD definitely scored a win here. Now, let's talk about the next AMD chip. That's right, 2 AMD chips back to back, and this is even higher than the previous one, and even higher than that. Yes. This is incredible. We are going to talk about their $1,400, because we just talked about their $750 chip. We're now going to talk about their $1,400 chip, and then their latest $2,000 processor. It's crazy. AMD has unveiled its third generation Ryzen Threadripper CPUs built on its 7 nanometer Zen 2 architecture. And as before, there are 24 and 32 core variants. And again, core with hyperthreading means that you can have up to 64 threads. That is almost unheard of. Like, I think there was also like a 36 or something like that, or 32 is darn near the highest I've ever heard any single processor. So this thing is amazing. They said that the TR3960X and the TR3970X, remember we just talked about the 3950X, so 3950, 60, and 70X respectively. They said that they have base clock speeds of 3.8 and 3.7. So the 3.8 gigahertz goes to the 24 core, and the 3.7 gigahertz goes to the 32, which for 8 more cores and only losing a single 0.1 gigahertz, wonderful. And both have a max boost speed of 4.5 gigahertz, which is right up there. I mean, some of the Intel chips are getting up to 5, on a pretty regular basis, but 4.5, like the difference between 4.5 and 5, it's something, but with 32 cores, you're not really going to miss it. It said that both chips will run using the new TRX 40 chipset with 72 available PCIe 4.0 lanes and 12 USB-C 3.1 Gen 2 10 gigabits per second ports. This thing can have up to 12 USB 3.1 ports. I'm not sure what a system like this, fully maxed out, fully customized, is going to look like, but it's going to be a monster. These chips and motherboards are aimed at content creators because the extra cores and high PCIe 4.0 bandwidth won't help gamers all that much. Like I said, if you're running a specific application, it just really doesn't matter because you're, reading and writing to a file is going to be a bottleneck if it's too slow, but at a certain speed, it doesn't even matter. So this is going to be for, as we said, content creators. Content creator is someone who makes videos, makes art, makes music, things like that. That said, they also said that AMD claimed that the Ryzen TR3970, which is the 32 core, will boost Adobe Premiere by encoding 47% faster than Intel's priced 18-core i9 9980XE. And by the way, the XEs, if you're wondering why you haven't really heard too much about those are the old Xenon processors that used to be exclusively server-based. If you had a server to build, you would buy the Xenon line of processors. They've since renamed them to the Core i9 XE models. So they're just as expensive as old server processors used to be, but they've also kind of mixed some of the software and some of the performance aspects of a typical processor that's not designed exclusively for a server. Let's see. So Intel's new i9 10980XE has roughly the same performance as the i9 9980XE, but it's half the price. They said that the cheaper 3960, which is the woefully slow 24-core processor, sarcasm there, will still deliver 22% speed bump over the other Intel processor. And on top of that, as for power consumption, both chips have a 280 watt draw, and so the i9 has a big advantage there with only a 165 watt draw. AMD, they're not as far ahead here in this market, and I would say they're probably not even far ahead. I'm sorry, I would say that they're not even ahead because they're comparing to chips that were released, I think, sometime in August or July. And so this is about a 6-month increase, and this is about what we would expect. And on top of that, they are running on the 7 nanometer as opposed to the 12 that I think Intel is still on. So for gaming, Intel's chips might still beat out the Threadrippers, especially when overclocked. It's also notable that the 2 3rd-gen Threadrippers used new socket STRX4, so they aren't hidden compatible with the second gen models and thus can't be used with older STR4 socket motherboards. AMD did not say whether the new socket would allow for scalability without providing for more details. We were very much hoping to see a 64-core version, as rumored, but it was still yet to materialize. A 64, like, if AMD came out with a 64-core, I would say impressive, bravo, we need that, but if they're pouring research and development money into a 64-core option, that services such a small segment of the market and maybe the more profitable one. Like, let's be honest, the 64 core would be amazing for servers and, supercomputers, the likes that land you $10 billion in funding from the federal government for building the latest supercomputer for, let's say, the Department of Defense or the Department of the Interior. Maybe those are the more profitable options, and they would allow for much more powerful supercomputers. But that is not a consumer-focused product, so I wouldn't even get too excited about that. AMD hasn't given an exact release date yet, but the 24-core Ryzen RT 3960X Threadripper CPU will cost $1,400 and $2,000 again for that one. And by comparison, you're looking at the Intel's 18-core, which is less cores, but higher clock speed than either one of these, comes in at just under $2,000. So there you go. In this arena, like the previous announcement with the 16-core Ryzen 3950X, that's a very exciting chip. That's a very exciting processor. At $750, that brings down the price of this level of processing by a lot, by hundreds of dollars. Up here, you're looking at a similar but different kind of processing. Again, lower clock speed as opposed to a lot more cores for a relatively similar price. And it's just not going to have as much mass appeal as their previous announcement. So I still think it's amazing. I still think, cores and threads and that kind of thing are something to really stay focused on. AMD, good job. Honestly, amazing presentation. And I love what they're doing there. Obviously, Computer America, we're consumer tech focused, and as much as we like to follow, let's say, supercomputers or servers or anything like that, we always hope for the best for consumers. So there you go. Okay, let's go ahead and continue on. Why don't we talk about some of these stories from just yesterday? We have two that I really wanted to talk about, and this first one is Robinhood. And I'm not going to say, exactly my browsing Well, I will. I saw this happen on Reddit, and I saw it happen live. I read the threads. My experience with Reddit is simply going to the top of all and just reading what everyone else upvoted. Like, I really don't care about joining communities or, getting involved in the culture of them. I just like to look at funny pictures. But I did see this one play out, and I thought it was interesting. And then I saw that Motherboard, which is a publication by Vice, covered the story, and it started to do the rounds in media. And I thought, wow, maybe this is really a big story. And it kind of was, because a certain Redditor, he did not make good investments, but he did find a glitch within the app, or I say glitch, I mean probably more of a flaw. This was unintended, but it still happened. And what really happened? So, and by the way, this is completely illegal. It's been solved since then. It's been proven that this was indeed a thing. Multiple users even went so far as to borrow about $1 million in credit to do this. And when I say borrow, I mean that they are essentially borrowing from Robinhood, which is a free stock trading app. And of course there are fees within it and what have you, but they borrowed about $1 million with only as much as, say, $15,000 in collateral. No business whatsoever would ever give you $1 million with only $15,000 down. So let's talk about this and how it happened. they said that they discover, or this one user discovered an exploit in the investing app Robinhood that they've named Infinite Leverage that enables them to lose huge sums of money at record speeds. And trust me, this particular subreddit was very good at doing that, even without this, but this just accelerated it for a couple people. So the core of the cheat code is that when Robinhood Gold, it's a membership program that users, if you have 2,000 deposited within the app itself, and you pay $10 a month, you're able to trade on margin. And I'm not going to get into covered calls, margins, stock options, things like that. But essentially, here's how it was explained to me, was that you have $2,000, and so if you have $2,000 and this membership, it's essentially meaning that you verified yourself, you're a person, and if you have $2,000 within the app, that means you have $2,000 in cash, and they'll let you borrow against the cash $2,000. So essentially, you have $2,000 cash, $2,000 in leverage, that you're allowed to spend. So you could spend up to $4,000. The problem, and this happens every single day with banks, the problem though comes with the fact that it didn't. Let's say you went out and purchased $2,000 worth of stock. You would then, for some reason, Robinhood didn't recognize that as kind of you owe someone else that money. Instead, it would say, oh, you have $2,000 in cash, $2,000 in leverage, and you own $2,000, which means that we can actually give you $4,000 because you have $4,000 in assets against only your $2,000 that you've already leveraged. So we'll give you even more money that you can then work with as well. It's kind of like pulling a ladder up, or increasing the number of rungs on a ladder, but you subtract them from the bottom of the ladder and you keep putting them up and up and up and up. Clearly, physically, and by any common sense, this should not work. This is not how life or anything kind of works. So they said that you can sell the covered calls on that stock, receive a premium now in the strike price when the option is exercised. So that's some of the jargon. And like we said, one user was able to turn his $2,000 deposited into his account and flip it into $50,000 worth of stock. And two other users were able to turn $4,000 and $15,000 into over $1 million in positions. That's not supposed to happen. $15,000 into $1 million is not supposed to happen. So with that being said, Robinhood Inc. is violating Article 220.122 of the Code of Federal Regulations due to its inaccurate buying power calculations when writing deep ITM covered calls on a margin account known as Robinhood Gold. Robinhood is clearly violating Federal Regulation T, as these traders are easily trading with over 25 times margin leverage as opposed to 2,000 allowed by regulation. So the intended consequence of Robinhood, like they said, the intended was completely legal. If you have $2,000 deposited, they will let you borrow against that $2,000. So that's 2 times. They're perfectly in the clear. They're good to go. But then when they allowed people to continuously add to that, and like they said, up to 25 times, that is really, really bad. So with that being said, there are probably fines coming down from the FTC to Robinhood for doing this. Even though it was a mistake, even though it was a glitch, it was illegal by the users to actually do this, because you're essentially stealing from Robinhood, which is a very weird sentence. But the way it all played out was actually very, very entertaining to see online and see it live. So I found that to be a very particularly interesting use case, and how technology, it's not a science, this shouldn't have happened, and it took one particular user to, really work the system in a way that not many people usually do, and it led to this whole catastrophe. So I think our next story that we're going to do, and this one was also from yesterday, but I really like the idea of it. James Dean. I am not from that generation. He passed away in 1955, and he was a movie actor. I hear he was a heartthrob. That was kind of his thing. And well, he was from a different generation that won't stop him from taking a supporting role in a new movie. That's right, production house Magic City Films plans to use photos and videos to recreate James Dean in CGI. There are some very clear ethical ramifications here, such as the fact that James Dean has never seen a computer. James Dean has never heard of using artificial intelligence and CGI to recreate his likeness for a film. I'm sure that the estate of James Dean would have no idea of what kind of action James Dean would prefer in this sort of thing. But here we go. Saying that more than 60 years after his last film, James Dean will return to screen in Finding Jack. In an exclusive Hollywood Reporter, shares that the iconic actor who passed away in 1955 will be posthumously cast as a major supporting role. The film is based on a novel about thousands of military dogs abandoned after a Vietnam War. Dean will play the character Rogan, saying that we searched high and low for the perfect character to portray the role of Rogan, which has some extreme complex character arcs, and after months of research, we decided on James Dean. You can bet a large portion of this is simply publicity, because there are many, many, many actors. I don't know, I don't have a head count, but I'm sure that there are many people looking to break into Hollywood and would love an acting gig that James Dean is being used with the help of computers to fill. I'm sure that they didn't search too hard. This was always intended. Saying that this isn't the first time Hollywood has cast deceased actors in films via CG. Oliver Reed appeared in Gladiator in 2000 after his death, and Paul Walker was digitally revived in Furious 7. Indeed, they used his brother and some CGI to make him look like it. So, yeah. But hey, there was still a person acting there. They said that Rogue One brought back Peter Cushing, the actor who played Grand Moff Tarkin in the original Star Wars and was passed away in 1994. But we saw in Rogue One, the ambitious technology is still limited. Cushing's movements were stiff, and he had a cold stare. Indeed. So Finding Jack will have to overcome similar challenges, considering that it will attempt to do so while bringing back such a huge star in a major supporting role. They said that Magic City Films hopes to release Finding Jack on Veterans Day 2020. We'll keep an eye on it. I'm excited to see some screen tests. I'm excited to see what they're able to do with the technology. The ethical questions have to do with the fact that, well, what if it goes really, really well? That's a problem, because there are actors who would then have to compete against deceased actors, or even there's a couple of ways that we can take this. There are actors who have to compete against the best actors of all time just to get a start in the industry. And then even beyond that, every actor who has not written some kind of will or some kind of statement saying, I do not want my likeness to be used after my death, where do you draw the line there? And then one more thing on top of that, what happens if they refuse, but you create a character that's like, oh, I'm not using, Ian McKellen, I'm actually using what Gandalf looked like within the movie. And you could have some weird loopholes that you still want the you still want the actor, but you base it on a character that does not have the same rights, and and then that CGI is used for that movie. What happens then? It's I think it's this blending of animated film and real life acting that has always been there, but we're taking it to the next extreme, which is fully blown CGI, photorealistic actors, and what that could mean for the industry. Very confusing times, but James Dean, congratulations on your new role. Can't wait to see you on TV. or I should say in movies. Let's go ahead and talk about China. I know, one of our favorite. China, this one coming to us from Kotaku, and China bans kids from playing games after 10 p.m., as well as caps microtransaction spending. Some of this, I can't even say that I agree with it, but this should be done. Like, rules like this should be enforced or handled by parents, by the parents of these kids. They should set a time limit for when, like, if I was speaking to a parent, I would say absolutely limit the amount of money or even limit access to the marketplaces that have real money transactions within them. Because your kid will spend like crazy and will actually form, in some cases, a gambling addiction because some games, their microtransactions are set up as a gambling system. If I was talking to a parent, I would definitely recommend that. If I was talking to a parent, I would say definitely limit screen time after 10 p.m. so that your kids actually wind down, relax, calm down, and actually go to sleep. Both of these, a parent should follow these. If I was talking to a government, I would say, get the heck out of here. You don't need to be legislating for this. This should be left up to the individual, because this kind of heavy-handed regulation, how do you know that you aren't limiting people's ability to do what they want? This definitely infringes on personal freedoms. How to raise your kid, how to conduct yourself in your household, things like that. So for a parent, I would recommend this. For government, I would say no thank you. So as the New York Times reports, China's National Press and Publication Administration announced the changes earlier this week, which are aimed at addressing issues like video game addiction, nearsightedness, and poor academic performance across a broad swath of society, because video games are the cause for all of these. The curfew time applies 7 days a week, while the 90-minute time limit applies Monday through Friday. And on weekends, kids will be allowed 3 hours per day. So generous of the Chinese government. And they'll also have to sign up for online gaming accounts using their real names and identification. Besides the stuff controlling time spent in front of a screen, an additional measure is aimed at tackling the amount of money spent on DLC, saying that the hard limit that you can spend in China now is between $28 and $57 per month. They're able to spend on items which scale depending on how old the player is. I'm sure that up to the age of 18, they can spend $57. I'm sure much younger, let's say 13, you're allowed to spend $28. And yeah, that's, again, a month. That's a huge source of revenue for these companies, and I'm wondering how they're going to fare with these new rules in place. So while this all sounds very sudden and drastic, the New York Times reports that the industry has known that this was coming for a while, and that many games and providers already provide baked-in limits similar to those in the Chinese market. I refer back to my earlier statement. If I was talking to a parent, these are okay rules. If I was talking to a government, oh heck no. So there you go. Real quick, let's go ahead and jump on over to this next article. It has to do with solar energy. And if I told you one of the problems with solar energy, what would it be? How about this one? You didn't even know this existed because I didn't know. And if I didn't tell you, then how the heck would you know? Not like you people have lives outside of Computer America. But I will say, this solar farm has to turn itself off every other day because it generates too much electricity. I'm going to tell you why that's ridiculous at first, and then it makes complete sense second. So this is happening in Australia, saying that when Australia's renewable energy portfolio reached its important milestone on Wednesday of providing 50% of the main grid's demand for the first time, one solar farm couldn't be part of the fun, and it had to look on from the sidelines. Why is that? The sight of wind and solar farms being switched off when wholesale electricity prices fall into negative territory has become increasingly common over the last few months. That's right, especially in Queensland and South Australia. saying that the facility that appears to have been affected the most has been a 95 megawatt Tailem Bend solar farm in South Australia. They said that it has an off-take agreement with the Snowy Hydro that broadly requires it to switch off when wholesale electricity prices go into negative territory, although the details are likely to be more complex than that. So what does that mean when electricity reaches negative prices? And that means that they will actually pay consumers, or I guess wholesale, so it would be for businesses and infrastructure, they would actually pay others to take the electricity off their grid so that they don't have an overload. Seems ridiculous, but that's the problem. They have too much electricity thanks to a combination of traditional energy means and in addition to green energy. So they said that they operate at more than 50% renewables on a yearly average and is often at more than 100%, and so the greatest propensity to experience negative prices. There you go. Indeed, its average price for the month of October was lower than any other state in the main grid, including those dominated by coal. That's the thing. We have finally reached that tipping point where green energy in some places, I'm not saying all places, but in some places is much more efficient than coal or natural gas. And a month, incidentally, when South Australia's grid emissions also fell, continuing the major reduction in emissions achieved over the last 5 years as coal was replaced by wind and solar. I don't want anyone to take this as a bad article. This is great. This is good. It said that it's common to see wind and solar farms switch off when prices go into negative territory or get close to zero. It happens either because of their off-take agreement obliged them to do so, or because they are merchant facilities that take the spot price and don't want to be paying other parties to take their output if prices do go negative. That's the thing, is that even though it doesn't really cost all that much money to run these things, if suddenly you are selling your electricity for negative, instead of selling it for 15 cents or 20 cents per megawatt or per a megawatt or megawatt hour or whatever it is, if you're selling it for like 15, 20 cents, but then suddenly, sunny days, good wind conditions, things like that, you're really putting out more than you're used to, and the demand isn't really there. Suddenly you are paying other people, let's say, even if it's like 1 cent or 2 cents for them to take your electricity off your hands. From a business perspective, it only makes sense to turn your grid off or turn your panels off, because hey, that means that you're saving yourself 1 to 2 cents. So they said that, and they can also be constrained off due to a variety of often complex things happening on the grid. It should be noted that this is pretty standard fare for all generators, be they wind, solar, gas, or coal. You won't see many peaking gas stations switched on at less than 100 megawatts, at less than $100 per megawatt hour, or even at 150 megawatt hours. So with that being said, they switch off every other day so that they aren't paying other people to deal with their electricity. The problem with the grid is not so much anymore electricity generation, because we have coal, we have natural gas, and of course this is Australia, so they have a lot of solar and wind and tidal energy coming in, things like that. They have their own supply and demand that they're dealing with here, but producing electricity is not the problem. Storing the energy for peak prices, because if it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, everyone is trying to run their air conditioners. Their businesses are trying to do what businesses do best. There's a lot of demand. And then let's just take 2 a.m. for instance. Everyone's asleep, lights are off, TVs are off. No one is running really anything in their homes. The demand is much, much lower in the middle of the night. So you can produce the amount of electricity that you need, let's just say through wind, that you would at night or day, but you don't need it. So being able to store it for later That's a huge issue. There just aren't massive, like think of like your laptop battery. There just aren't massive batteries sitting in that many places that can handle that much. So through artificial intelligence and through, city management, like this is their big job, they're getting better at it. But that does not mean the issue is still not there. So that being said, the article continues on for quite a bit. Let's just kind of wrap this up by saying that meanwhile, just about every new large-scale wind and solar project or wind and solar hybrid is now coming with storage attached, and there are a growing list of huge projects that will likely propel the state towards its unofficial target of net 100% renewables by around 2030, such as this solar and storage project in Alinta. Talon Ben, who of course runs this one that has to shut off every other day, is considering a battery storage, but the Vina people would not comment on where they were with that idea. Safe to assume, though, that a second stage of Talon Ben goes ahead, batteries will be included. I think that's really the main part, is that if you can keep producing electricity around the clock, but then you're able to provide it on demand whenever you want, that is the true dream of solar energy, is that you produce more energy than you need during the day, and then you store it and then release it at night. That's what solar is really designed to do. It's designed to work with the battery. Batteries are going to have to be just as capable as green technology in the future. And unfortunately, by and large, we're still using lithium ion. Of course, I know that we have lithium cadmium or something like that, and we have other kinds of hybrid batteries. Battery technology has not been keeping up, and it's really becoming the big throttling point for many of our technologies that we use. Speaking of a technology that we use and throttling point, I'll just say ahead, this is not the answer to everything, but this is actually very, very cool. Storage. When you save a picture on your computer and it only lasts as long as your hard drive. And of course, let's say you print it on paper, it will only last as long as you print it on that piece of paper. How about this solution? It's Microsoft's Project Silica is going to offer 1,000-year storage. That's right. This is beyond decades or centuries. We are now getting into the thousands of years. And I definitely like what they're using or what they're storing on this particular device. They're saying that Microsoft Research stored a 65.6 gigabyte digital copy of the 1978 movie Superman in this small piece of glass for Warner Brothers. And why they did that, I think it has to do with the fact that Superman was dealing with crystals in the 1978 movie, and that's how most information was stored for Superman. So why not store Superman on crystals, or in this case, silica? Ars spoke Tuesday with Dr. Ant Rostron, a principal researcher at the Microsoft Research in Cambridge, UK, about an innovative cold storage project called Silica. They aim to replace both tape and optical archival disk as the media of choice for large-scale, long-duration cold storage. Microsoft Research is partnering with film giant Warner Brothers, which is directly interested in reducing cost and increasing reliability of its own cold storage programs. And I think what they mean by cold storage is not, a freezer, but more to the fact that you don't really need to access it, but you need it. It's, kind of like what they're showing here. The 1978 movie of Superman, there are other digital copies, but to keep the master, to keep a version to always have access to it in case of emergencies, where do you put that? Of course, you can have the original film reel, you can have tape, you can have digital storage, but for long term, like knowing that regardless of what happens, as long as this thing stays around, in let's say 50 years, tape is going to start to degrade, it's going to start to decompose. Digital storage is only going to last as long as, however many years your hard drive is going to last. The best long-term storage solutions really aren't that good. Let's say if you want to know that for for archival purposes, you want that, you want every iteration of your movie for the next 200 years, for the next 500 years. Warner Brothers wants to know that their movie is safe. This is where it comes in. This is where this solution comes in. The medium in question is a block of high purity glass which has voxels etched into it with femtosecond lasers, very, very quick and very, very accurate lasers. Each voxel, so that's probably like a pixel, but instead of a pixel, it's a voxel, stores multiple bits in two properties, retardance and angle, which may in turn be read using microscope imaging and polarizing light. Voxels may be written 100 or more layers deep in a 2 millimeter deep piece of glass, and by focusing the laser to the desired depth within the block itself. Pretty cool. Obviously, the speed of both read and write is currently leaves something to be desired, saying that it took a week to store 76 gigabytes of data into this piece of glass. So 1 week to store 76 gigs, that's not very attractive. But it's stored forever, so that's something. The technology is still in its infancy, and large decreases in time both for reading and writing are expected to be moving forward. Obviously, he says that he still doesn't expect anyone will likely try to actually play Superman directly from its Silica record, but that's not what it's intended for. True long-term archival of data is very expensive, saying that when the researcher was in college, he took part in a research project for the university's archival department, and they needed a database application to index and track its digital media records in large part so that it would be able to budget for and carry out archival renewal operations within expected refresh cycles. Like we said, the integrity and the ability to play back information off of CDs or tapes or anything else physical can only last a couple of decades. This will last much, much longer. So making things worse, the lifespan of burned CDs is frequently very short, saying that they can begin failing after only 5 years. And beyond that, if any kind of fluctuation in temperature, they're saying that you can extend them by keeping them, I guess, actually in cold storage at 5 degrees Celsius. That's another expense because you have to keep that entire facility in essentially a refrigerator. So with that being said, I'm going to include the article here in the show notes. We're going to go ahead and move on, but I definitely like that idea. Storing things in glass. We've seen storing things in crystals, and it's a very interesting prospect. And having the ability, to know, think about how amazing it is. 1,000 years later, and we're able to find a rock etched with Germanic or Nordic runes, and we're like, hey, this was proof of a civilization from 1,000 years ago. It's incredible. Now think about the possibilities of not just storing, rocks or scrolls or books or whatever last 1,000 years, but being able to store recordings of voice, of video, of, entire art projects and information, and storing it in such a way that it is pristine. It's not even like it has to be digitally restored or it has to be deciphered. No, this is perfectly preserved and ready to go. It really is a sign of our times. It's a sign of an advancing society. So I definitely like the idea of that. Let's go ahead and talk about, I don't feel like talking about cars right now. How about we discuss, Netflix CEO. Who knew? The gentleman behind no ads, but at the same time, having the ability to watch as much content as you want, as long as you want, for a low monthly price. That's right, the Netflix business model. Who knew that subscriptions were less important than time spent streaming? That's right, that's what he really values about his company. Let's hope investors feel the same way. Netflix founder and CEO Reed Hastings doesn't have any beef with any other streaming services and is actually planning on subscribing to Disney Plus when it launches. These are just some of the insights he shared with the DealBook conference on Wednesday. And he recognized, he said that they said that Hastings said he was confident in Netflix's position in the market, despite a new wave of competition from the likes of Apple and Disney. He noted that it was unrealistic to expect consumers to subscribe to just one service, and that the real numbers aren't in subscription figures, but in the amount of time people spend with each provider, which I think is completely true. People are going to subscribe to, I think, about 2 is going to be average, at least 1, and at most maybe 3, and heaven forbid 4. But yeah, a large majority of these will have an overlap in users. The bigger question, and I think he's absolutely right here, is that which service keeps users coming back? Is it Netflix with their videos and things like that? Because that means that users will be much more interested in keeping the service. If they subscribe to Netflix and Disney, but Netflix gets their viewership 20 hours a week as opposed to Disney's 5, because there were only a couple movies that Disney was really that the users were really interested in Disney in the first place, then when it comes time to make that decision to switch platforms or cancel a subscription, they're going to go with the one that they use least. So the numbers are going to be there. And don't get me wrong, at some point, subscribers have to matter. But time spent within the application is going to be a huge indicating factor about the long-term health of these streaming platforms. They said, nonetheless, he recognizes that Netflix can't rest on its laurels, and in the face of deep-pocketed rivals, says that the company plans on taking spend up quite a bit, and it looks like at a projected $15 billion in content costs for 2019 on a gross cash basis, and at least $2.2 billion in debt and financing. He says that Hastings, that the in-service advertising remains off the table. We're very comfortable with doing no ads like Disney Plus, and we're going to compete on that basis. I think it would honestly be a death knell. If Netflix caved and said, okay, fine, we'll do ads, that will be the end of their business, and I think that they know that. He was also asked about theatrical releases, another hot topic in the world of streaming, because obviously, with $15 billion in content being produced, some part of it is that you can get these things released in your home and you can watch it, and value added, great, perfect. It keeps you coming back to the service. But other people, they see these amazing movies that come out on Netflix, and they're like, that would actually do really well in theaters. So some people want Netflix to produce some of these movies for a theatrical release. So while the likes of Amazon is happy to pursue movies with the end goal of getting them on its platform, theatrical releases don't appear to be a major goal for the company. He acknowledged that Netflix isn't doing the very biggest movies, and hinted that there could be projects in the pipeline, but added that we're not in the business of theaters, we're in the business of pleasing our members. Aw, that's good. But yeah, Netflix, they were the first, they continue to be one of the best, and I think with Disney coming out, yeah, they need to be cautious, they need to be careful, but at the same time, at least the CEO of the company seems to have his head on correctly. It's not shoved somewhere where the light doesn't shine. He's very cognizant of what's happening in the streaming industry. So that's just what you want to see. Okay, I think for our last story that we're going to do, and we'll try to make this one as quick as possible, T-Mobile, not talking about the merger, don't worry about it, T-Mobile's 5G network will go live on December 6th. It's about a month. Not bad. So the flashy numbers are dependent on the carrier completing the Sprint merger, though, which, so I take it back, it is about the Sprint merger. T-Mobile will officially activate its 5G network on December 6th, the carrier announced, dedicated to its upcoming merger with Sprint. According to CEO John Laguerre, 200 million customers will be covered and have access on day one, with 5,000 cities and towns to be covered by the end of 2019. Music in the background, by the way, so we'll have to wrap this up. The company plans to market the initiative as 5G for Good, likely an effort to drum up additional support for the merger with Sprint. Laguerre went on to claim that 90% of Americans would get access to 100 megabits per second speeds by 2024, thanks to its potential 5G network. 200 million customers will have access to the network on day one, and 5,000 cities and towns covered by the end of 2019. I don't think that they needed to merge for that. And again, he is placing it solely on the shoulders of merging. And I think that those numbers are going to be woefully inflated. Even if everything goes as planned, they will not reach those metrics. But hey, he's pushing really hard for this merger. He stands to make a lot of money. He stands to be a very happy gentleman if this goes through. So everyone, with that being said, that's it for our show. I want to thank you so much for tuning in. If you want to check out more, computeramerica.com. As always, tomorrow on the program, Ralph Bond. That's right, the one, the only. Looking forward to that. And everyone, until next time, have a great day. Thank you. Catch you next time. Bye, everyone.